Hey everybody, not on my bingo card for this year was a new force feedback system for GTR2. Now, if you're sort of into GTR2, you are well aware that there is this amazing thing by Iron Wolf, the enhancements project, adding a lot of features and modern stuff to this old game. And I recently tried it, especially now with this new force feedback, and it drives nice, it's fun to play and it works well. So it's definitely worth a try. Easy to find that on Steam for a couple bucks. You can also get the SimBin package or something with all their games for a couple bucks more. A worthwhile investment for some sort of retro but surprisingly modern feeling driving sims there. So definitely check that out. In this video I'll limit myself to talking a bit about this new force feedback stuff, because I'm certainly not an expert on GTR2 and certainly not on all the features of this amazing enhancements project that Iron Wolf has been making. So force feedback stuff only, and maybe I'm missing some things and I'm not an expert on this game, so I just want to get that out there. I will use a spreadsheet, of course, and there is also a link in the description to the crew chief page. This is the old one because we haven't yet updated it, with download links and links to the manual and that sort of stuff. The spreadsheet here that I'm showing you how to tune the force feedback will also be available for download there. In GTR2 we do not have the steering arm forces available in the telemetry, unlike AMS1 and rFactor1, and you can do good force feedback based on that, because that's literally the force on the steering rack, so that's a good source, if other things are also correct, by the way, which is not always true. So we don't have that for GTR2, but we do have tire information, and Iron Wolf went digging and he also found the longitudinal forces on the tires, so we can sort of simulate the suspension effects while doing pretty realistic tire effects, because we can also add a function called pneumatic trail. This was added to rFactor1, not in a great way, and improved with AMS1, but it's missing in GTR2, but we can sort of get that pretty realistically from a slip parameter that is available. So long story short, we are pretty good with suspension effects and quite good with tire effects, and we combine the two and we can sort of use the existing telemetry from GTR2 plus the longitudinal forces that Iron Wolf found to get very solid force feedback. In this spreadsheet there is also my PLR file, which has some settings. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just including this so you can have the same PLR file and experience that I had. Of course, in game you then still have to assign the controls. And there is this large plugin file that comes with the enhancements project, and just a few of the settings that I've used are here to enable us higher frequency, smoother force feedback, and of course enable the force feedback system as well. We have a chart here with a few things. The blue line is the grip of the tire, and it needs a bit of slip. That's on the horizontal axis before you get the grip. This is just a copy paste from a GTR2 slip curve. And I plot this, it doesn't change here, it's a fixed thing, but then you can see the force feedback at low tire loads, so maybe without a lot of downforce, and maybe like a rear engined car, medium loads or high loads with downforce, like a fast corner or Eau Rouge, for example. So we have the force feedback versus the slip of the tire for low, medium and high loads. There is this important line here, the 10,000, that's the clipping line. If the force exceeds this, you will get force feedback clipping, and you can press left control plus numpad 5 in game, and that brings up a steering force number, sort of a live readout. So drive around a bit, because it will be a bit different for each car. See if in like a pretty high speed corner, if that number stays below 10,000. If it frequently exceeds 10,000, the force feedback will clip and it will feel a bit numb. So it's a bit of possible per car tweaking that you may have to do. It is also possible via the CCHDC files to have per vehicle parameters for the force feedback. This spreadsheet gives you the parameters, and on the little triangles there is a bit of explanation, but I will play around with it here as well so you can see what happens. If you leave this setting to 1, the adjust gain, playing with these numbers will always bring the highest curve up to 10,000. Now again, this is not running the actual game, it's a sort of a great simplification of the force feedback that I simulate here. So that doesn't mean this is the correct gain always. It depends on the car. So you do have to check that in game with left control numpad 5. Make sure the gain is correct for your car that you're driving. Leaving this at 1 makes it easy to see the differences between the other settings on the shape of these curves and how the spacing between the low, medium and high load force feedback curve. So that's why it's a useful thing to do. And it's not a bad starting point to use for your ini file, which is here. Best thing you can do is just play around with these numbers and get a feel for how these curves change. Some things to pay attention to is how quickly these forces, the force feedback ramps up off center. So 0 is center steering basically, and then you apply steering, you go to the right. I find that probably the most important thing about the force feedback is that it ramps up fast, and that's what the pneumatic trail parameter mostly controls. If we 0 pneumatic trail, you see we get a much slower ramp up, a different shape as well, but we get a slower ramp up of force feedback versus tire slip. It's also changing the spacing. You can see that if we go back, the spacing grows a little bit. So there with pneumatic trail you get a bigger difference between a lightly loaded tire slipping and a highly loaded tire slipping. But that's sort of secondary to the difference it makes on the initial ramp up of forces. And this is 4 zeros, and a 1 is sort of a fair medium value to use. But you know, there isn't right or wrong. Whatever feels right to you is good. Then we have the suspension trail, and in relation to the pneumatic trail, whichever one is bigger, it starts to dominate. So if we make this huge, we lose all that drop off. So normally, and this is what you would expect from force feedback, the forces, the steering forces, they reach a maximum a little bit before the tire reaches maximum grip. That is normal, that is how it works. And I find that less important than that initial ramp up. That helps me, and I'm perfectly fine, you know, feeling that the forces start to drop ever so slightly while we approach peak grip. That is not distracting or weird to me, it's realistic too. And there's this drop off in force that's realistic. And if your suspension trail is large in relation to your pneumatic trail, the drop-off will be reduced and reduced and even more reduced, but also relatively that the ramp-up feels like it's a bit slower here. So that's how you want that force feedback to feel as the tire slips more. This is a fair value, something like this, and it gives you significant loss of force feedback, but there's still quite a lot remaining, so it still feels communicative, and it helps you out with centering the steering with big slides and stuff like that. So the relationship, whichever of these is bigger, dominates the feel, and if we make this bigger, we will get more drop off. If we make it smaller, we get less drop off, and we can do the same here. If we make this smaller, we get lots of drop off, or we make it bigger, we get less drop off. So that shape is set there, and these might be reasonable values. The shape of this drop-off you can tweak with this grip fract power. The smaller you make this, the more gradual it is. And it should be fairly close, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 is realistic. And you can also see the bigger this number becomes, the more that initial ramp up is apparent, and that feels nice to me, that self-centering, off-center feel is increased if you increase this number. So 2 or 3 is a reasonable value. And then you feel the off-center response, maybe that is nice, and then maybe you find this to lose too much force feedback with steering. Well, then we just make the trail a bit higher, so you can tweak it like that. The scrub is not something I can visualize here, sadly. That's a bit complicated. So this is acting on the longitudinal tire forces, so this only works if there is a different braking force, for example, on the left and the right front tire. When those forces are different, it can pull on the steering. And typically this is a positive value, and this is a typical value. It will also be apparent on front-wheel drive cars if they have asymmetrical driving forces left and right. You can also feel that on the force feedback. So it's really cool that I and Wolf found the longitudinal forces, so we could add that effect. It's hard to describe how that feels, because maybe you're approaching a corner and while trail braking you lock the inside front. And that will mean the braking forces left and right are no longer equal. And with a positive number here, that should make the steering heavier, but since you are locking up, the inside front tire no longer really has a lot of cornering force as well, so that lowers the force feedback, while the difference in braking force increases the force feedback. So it's a bit difficult to say what happens to your force feedback, but it's nice to have a scrub radius here where we can simulate that effect. But it's on the more subtle side than the other parameters. The end result is quite detailed and quite complete, but not completely complete. But what is nice, the cornering feel, the cornering grip is pretty realistic. There's not much missing there that you would get in like AMS1. It is almost the same. And if you start to lock a tire, of course, that means it also loses cornering grip. So you feel the front go light if you start to lock one or two tires. So that's very communicative. The only things that are sort of missing is the feeling of caster. If you jack up, like if you're in a go-kart and you steer while standing still, that feels heavy. We do not have that. It's a little tricky. Maybe there is a way to do that in the future. And there are no gyroscopic forces, which are naturally a part of the force feedback in AMS1, because they are part of the physics system. We don't have them here. We could kind of add it as well, maybe. So maybe there is something in the future to improve, but I'd say 80-90% of the feel of force feedback, physics-based force feedback, is here. So that's pretty cool. And when you've made some curves that you would like to try out, you can simply copy to the cggep.ini file and save it. And you can have GTR2 running, just exit to the menu and then go back on track again and you will feel it. And I've also supplied these numbers here. These are my suggested defaults for a nicely sort of stiff feeling. When you stand still, the forces are sort of stiff as if there is no power steering and it's a struggle to turn the wheel. Just some defaults that I find nice, which of course you can play around with that. So I think that's about it. You just have to play around with it a bit. Again, I would basically try my PLR and make sure you have these settings. I'm not saying they're the best or the only ones, but that's what I use to make it. But there are more experienced GTR2 players. You can find them probably on that crew chief forum that's also linked, where you can download all this stuff. I think that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy slightly better, hopefully better force feedback in GTR2. And I'm also uploading a video doing some laps driving and being pretty, positively surprised by the feel. A little arcadey, but very much sort of in control, fun feel of that sim. Alright guys, bye bye.